The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Charlie Kirk, the American political commentator, author, and broadcaster. You are the founder of Turning Point USA, the largest and fastest growing conservative youth activist organization in America, representing over 2,000 high school and college campuses nationwide. You have appeared over 600 times on CNBC and Fox News, are a columnist for Newsweek, and were named in the Forbes list 30 under 30. Your new book, The MAGA Doctrine, is a New York Times bestseller, which lays out the principles of the Trump ideology that will guide the future Republican Party. Charlie, welcome to London Real.
Honored to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, great to have you. First of all, I just wanted to announce that we are now streaming on our brand new Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Can everyone watching us now please share this link via the sidebar to all your social media channels? Let me just repeat that. If you could share this on the sidebar to all your social media channels, it's important. Just ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes and they can decide. Charlie, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anyone in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at londonreal.tv/Kirk. Thanks to the generous donations of over 31,000 people around the world, we affectionately call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can go to londonreal.tv/freedom to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And Charlie, I am very excited to have you here today. You recently said that there are 4 branches of the government, and the 4th is called Silicon Valley, and they're stronger than the rest of them. Maybe you can give me a little perspective on the fight we've been battling lately. I mean, until 8 weeks ago, I was the darling of YouTube, and now we're literally one strike away from being deplatformed, all from having calm conversations that don't encourage violence, destruction of property, and yet we're still being censored. What are your thoughts on this, Charlie?
Well, look, this is now one of the biggest issues in Western civilization. Look, the founding fathers, they wrote extensively about how they were worried about power, centralized power. That's why I'm a conservative. And now in recent years, we're starting to ask ourselves the question, is there a power that is growing that is potentially bigger than the federal government, that actually might have more centralized capacity to influence public opinion or be able to have positive or negative sort of influences on society? And so you look at Google, for example, and you mentioned YouTube. They have the power to be able to topple a government. 90+% of all search results go through Google. And it's interesting because a lot of our monopoly laws were written in the early 1900s for a completely different type of monopoly, for a monopoly that would have had vertical monopolization and would have been exploiting people on prices. This is different. This is something that could potentially be culturally exploitative, that could be linguistically or politically exploitative. And so this is happening much quicker than people realize. And so there's a collision happening right now in the conservative movement. I think it's a healthy one, where there's some people that say we should do nothing. I think that's a mistake. People say that, oh, just let free market principles play itself out. I'm not of the opinion that is going to first of all, I don't believe there's actually a free market in tech right now. I think that's actually not an honest observation of how these tech companies operate. And secondly, I think you need to look more broadly at the power that these tech giants actually hold, whether it be in the political space, their ability to make people, they essentially hold the power to digitally assassinate somebody. And so I want you to understand the power of that. If I told you that someone's existence, the amount of time they spend on the phone, So if someone's watching this right now, go to your screen time on either your iPhone or your Android or your device. If it's more than 5 hours or 6 hours a day, then your identity is mostly through your device. And so if a tech company has the ability just to assassinate you and disappear you, are they not getting rid of a aspect of you? And so there's a lot of questions about what does this look like public policy wise and philosophically. But I'm of the opinion that when you have the traditional three branches of government and you have the fourth branch of government, which is the unelected, unknown, unchecked power of the bureaucracies, but even more so than the bureaucracies, you have these tech giants in Silicon Valley, and not every one of these companies are equally as abusive. I want to make that very clear. They're all different degrees. Twitter is perplexing at how aggressive they've been in recent days, fact-checking the president using Washington Post literature while completely ignoring the tyrants of the Chinese Communist Party, Google going after individuals such as yourself. Facebook has very questionable decisions they've made on their government oversight board of censorship and this new fact-checking process. But I will say with Facebook, I can get a human being on the phone within an hour at Facebook, and I can give you examples of actually how they have communicated with me and actually admitted that they've done some things not so well. Whether that will continue or not will remain to be seen. But Google and Twitter right now, they are on a very dangerous path to basically say they want to be a leftist company. They want to be a leftist, anti-conservative, anti-free speech company. And that's something that should concern everyone watching this, regardless of your political persuasion or affiliation.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of these monopoly laws were kind of made, against the steel industry or the banking industry or, different types of industry that didn't actually control information. And, it's funny, when I'm out on the streets, I just bumped into a mother and daughter who recognized me and they came up and said, we believe in what you're saying. We want to hear this information. But on the streets, you hear that with real people. But when you go online, there's a whole different version of what's happening. Again, I'm being censored. I'm being said I'm this or that. And like you said, my identity can kind of get hijacked by a couple companies that kind of dominate search. It's funny, I had Candace Owens on last week and she mentioned DuckDuckGo. I never had actually heard of that search engine. And she was saying I was actually Googling how many black people in the world, and I got all these articles about how coronavirus was hurting black people more and all this stuff. And she's like, I was just trying to get this, but I was served up this whole other agenda of information. And I think, like you said, we forget how much of our human experience is digital, and then it's actually controlled by a few.
Yeah, and so that's a phenomenal point. And so we have to ask ourselves the question also about intellectual property. So for example, I've been on Twitter. I was one of the first users of Twitter, percentage-wise, not in aggregate, but I started using Twitter in 2011. Okay, so that's pretty early. I think that's fair to say, more so than most. I was a junior in high school when I first heard about Twitter. I happened to watch the Ellen DeGeneres show, of which I haven't made a habit out of that. But I was watching Ellen DeGeneres show as a junior in high school, and I remember they're talking about this new platform called Twitter. I remember exactly the class. I remember the seat I was sitting in the computer tech class, third period of school, and I started the Twitter account. And so I've poured my life and soul over 9 years into that Twitter account. I'm talking about tens of thousands of hours of my work, my productivity, my thoughts, my dreams on that Twitter account. That's not Twitter. That's me. So if Twitter decides to delete my Twitter today, which they could do, I hope they don't. I have 1.7 million Twitter followers. My Twitter followers have completely stagnated. We were gaining 10,000 Twitter followers every couple of days on Twitter. And now we've basically flatlined since the virus because we've said some things that have, essentially challenged the status quo. And so now let's say Twitter decides to ban me. I hope they don't. All of a sudden that 9 years of work goes where? There's actually precedent in property law to say that you as an individual, when you pour yourself into creating something that is yourselves, you should have the rights to that intellectual property. Why is Twitter able to just delete all the unique thoughts and all the unique takes and all the unique videos, all the unique commentary that I put on their platform over the last 9 years? Now they could say, well, that's our platform. You voluntarily consented to it. That's actually not that cut and dry and simple. For example, first of all, they monetized my speech. They make money off of me. Okay. And they did not pay me a royalty. So there's an argument there. But also, if I own 10,000 acres of land in rural Montana, and someone actually comes onto my piece of property and builds a cabin, over a period of time, if I don't challenge them and I just let them do that, there's actually, it's similar to squatters' rights, that after a period of time, the court will say, no, that's their cabin now. They built it. they poured into it, that's theirs because you didn't challenge them. And so that might be a little bit too kind of distant in the legal community to actually have any merit because of the power of Twitter's, access to legal expertise. But I'll tell you, there's something to that because I have, for example, I'll get over 130,000 retweets on a single day, 130,000 on a single day. That's not insignificant. That's what some people will get over the course of their entire Twitter existence. I will reach about 100 million people on Twitter a day. Twitter needs people like me. I'm a content creator. And now I'm not going to play victim. I benefit from it too. Make no mistake. I'm not one of those people that wants to just completely bite the hand that's feeding me. I have benefited from these platforms. But at some point, they have to treat me not as just someone that is the complete and total enemy, but as someone that is actually someone who's feeding them what they need. They need thousands of Charlie Kirks to perform on their platform to be able to have them to be a monetized company and be the multi-billion-dollar company that they are.
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. I had a conversation with YouTube 12 days ago, and honestly, it was after we had a strike, which meant for 7 days we were not allowed to upload or go live, and the reps basically said, you make one small move and you're gone. As in, we won't even give you another strike, you'll just be off. And I've been on there 9 years, 8,000 videos, including 5 documentary films, 250 million views, another 250 million views on YouTube from my content that people have ripped. My whole life is on there. I mean, I told them, I got emotional on the call. It's like, it's my life. And I literally meet people on the streets and our content has literally saved their life. I didn't believe it at first, but they're like, I was on the brink of suicide. I was in divorce. I was addicted to drugs. And like, I saw one of your guests and they said the right thing at the right time. So I know what you mean. It's this creator, but it's just more than that. It's more than just some videos as well. And yet they were ready to do that because I published some videos that violated their community policy, which is a private company they say they can have. I argued that it was so subjective that I was literally living in terror. That's what I said, I feel like I'm being terrorized because I don't know when you're gonna come and find a video from 3 years ago and tell me it's hate speech. One of the guys was a big fan of Priyanka Chopra. She's a famous Bollywood actress. And I was talking on the phone, he said, I love your interview with Priyanka. I said, what if in minute 43 she says, I hate Hollywood directors? Like, you could come back tomorrow and say, I just violated community and now I've been deplatformed. I said, this is what I live in. And as a creator, it doesn't feel right. And yet they go back to this private company thing, which I agree, it doesn't hold water on a lot of ways.
Let me build that out, the private company thing. And so let's just look from a public perception standpoint. Let's take an American company that people know that it's owned by conservatives, Home Depot. So Home Depot's owned by a couple, founded by a couple conservatives. What if Home Depot said, if you wear a Biden hat or a Democrat hat, you're not allowed to shop at Home Depot? How do you think people would react to that? Now, they'd have a right to do it. It's a private company, but do you think that would be tolerated? I mean, so let's use another example. Let's use American Airlines. Let's say if American Airlines said that if you open up your app and you read the Huffington Post, or if you have a newspaper that is the New York Times, you're not allowed to board American Airlines planes. Do you think that would stand up in a court of law? Be interesting. I don't think so. And I don't think the public pressure would apply. So why is it that all of a sudden that these tech companies are getting away with censoring us? And so there's a couple ways that this is going to happen. I'm going to tell you the bad way that this could happen. The bad way is if the left gets control of this and they want to turn this into a public utility where they deem what is fair and not. That is worse than what's even happening now. Let me just put a danger out there. Elizabeth Warren wants to nationalize these companies, and so does Bernie Sanders, because it'll be 10 times worse than what's happening now. They'll have some sort of nonsense social justice warrior, college professor board of anti-American, anti-Western people that will not even give you 3 strikes. They'll be worse than the tyrants that are running these companies right now. Now, what I think that might be actually more interesting is to get the Department of Justice involved under AG Barr and say, is platform access a civil right? And I think you could make that argument. And I'm not totally 100% behind this idea because I see some traps in it, but I'm very open to it. Do you have a civil right to be able to use the place where all public discussion is happening? So, for example, you're able to petition your government and you're able to get the right to say whatever you want outside of the U.S. Capitol or the Supreme Court. You're able to fill out that form, and even if you're the worst aspects of society, you're able to get that form of petition. Okay, why can't you do that on YouTube? You could make an argument that you're really not going to have as much of an influence outside of the Capitol to influence and have the First Amendment rights in our Constitution, as you are able to have actually access to where 92% of all search results are in YouTube. That is by and far away, not even close to the number one video provider on the planet. Facebook is probably second or third. So why wouldn't we be able to have that constitutional right? When people say, well, they're not bound by the First Amendment. But again, there's plenty of private companies that would not be able to discriminate based on viewpoint. They just wouldn't. I want you to imagine right now if Chipotle or McDonald's said that Democrats are not able to come and shop at, not able to purchase product at our store. That would not hold up. They'd say that's anti-discrimination. That's against discrimination. They would use all sorts of different precedent. Well, why are these tech companies immune to that? And so then, of course, there's the Section 230 to Communications Decency Act. I wrote a piece for the Washington Post, of all places, that published this. Kudos to them for actually publishing it, and demerits to them for everything they've done since. But I'll tell you that, look, it provides immunity from liability for them, for providers and users. There's something to that. And I've heard very thoughtful rebuttal to it. They say, oh, Charlie, that's not enough. But this is headed in a very, very, very dangerous direction where you have these tech companies that are acting like Stalinists, that they are going to stamp out opinion that they don't like. And I want to differentiate the tech companies again. Twitter and Google have just been awful. Facebook has some very troubling trends, but I'll give you an example of Facebook. Now, whether or not this will continue or not, I don't know. They censored one of my posts last week through one of their very puzzling fact-checking funding enterprises through Reuters. They said, this is untrue. It was so bad. I contacted Facebook and I said, please look into this. This is Reuters doing activist journalism. Within 12 hours, Facebook removed the censor. Good for them. Now, it took a lot of my time, a lot of my energy. I can't get a human being to respond to me at Twitter. And so we had one of our individuals, ALX, that works for us at Turning Point USA. His name's Alex LaRusso, 24-year-old kid, one of the nicest people you ever meet in your entire life, 100,000 followers on Twitter, followed by the president, retweeted by the president, and Twitter just decided to disappear him, similar to a Wuhan scientist. Just, we're going to get rid of him. And his whole digital identity is gone. Years of work. I appealed. I reached out directly to Jack. And I don't know what's going on there. Do they just want to become a pseudo-Stalinist tech company? Is that their new approach, or do they want to represent our country? Or not, I shouldn't even represent our country, just represent all viewpoints of our country, I think is a more proper way to say it. So look, this is one of the biggest issues of our time. This is something that if we fail to address it and recognize it, we are going to have a subset of private companies that have more power than our government. Therefore, they run our country. And it's fair to say that most people at these tech companies hate everything we stand for. They hate free expression. They're postmodernists, anti-American, anti-Western, anti-God believing individuals that are on an activist-driven campaign to stamp out people that they disagree with.
Well, it's been fascinating being on the other end of it, until 2 months ago, I just heard about people that experienced this, and now I'm experiencing it. And again, if you walked into Chipotle and they said, if you don't agree with the vaccination agenda, we won't serve you, they couldn't do that. If you disagree that maybe a mask should be worn to protect you against COVID-19, we won't serve you, they wouldn't do that. And again, there is precedent for this. If you had a diner in the South in the 50s and you might have said, oh, our policy is to refuse to serve black people. Was that okay? It actually wasn't okay. And so we made sure that it was enforced. So,
and just really quick, the way they would respond to that, though, is that a Civil Rights Act, racial discrimination, whereas this is preference and viewpoint discriminate. And it's a distinction without a difference, but you're exactly right that there is precedent of law. For example, that there is precedent now that these private companies will be under the Department of Justice and their power if you don't, in certain states, subscribe to their gender identity persuasion codes. And so, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And so then people say, well, a restaurant is not a platform. It's not under the Communications Decency Act. Well, maybe, but how is that any different than saying how is it any different than saying, like, you can't go on to this airline and you have this certain perspective? I like the airline example because there's only 3 of them, basically. There's United, Delta, and American Airlines. And there's so few of them that no one would be able to say that airlines would be able to discriminate based on viewpoint. And as long as you are within the code of what the airline deems to be acceptable behavior and you're not screaming, you're not outlandish, you're able to board that airline. And so look, there's a lot happening here. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize for that. It triggered that thought. So
no, it's good. I mean, there's a lot happening here. What do you think of the move we just seen that Joe Rogan made by going to Spotify? I mean, at first we heard the headlines of the cash that was involved, the $100 million deal. But then when you dug deeper, you could hear that one of the reasons was that he felt he was being censored on YouTube. He specifically called out YouTube and Twitter in the Barry Weiss article in the New York Times. And, we know he stopped live streaming a year ago. That was curious to me. And now he's potentially going to Spotify where they're going to not have that censorship. Is there a capitalistic way around this where new platforms will come up? Or is YouTube getting the message? Or is it such a big monopoly that we're not convinced that'll happen?
So the answer is both. We have to look for external solutions. I'm a huge Joe Rogan fan. I don't see eye to eye on him with a lot of different things, especially his drug usage. Happy to talk to him about that. But I think he's brilliant. I think he's one of the best communicators, best interviewers of our time. He has a way about him that makes it feel as if you're eavesdropping in on a private conversation. And I also just love the over-masculinity of his entire show, that I'm going to own the fact that I am an alpha male, and if you don't like it, don't watch it. I'm actually in the minority opinion. I think that he's undervalued in that deal. I think he's worth way more than $100 million. I think Spotify got the better deal out of it. If it's true that he's going to just put all of his content exclusively on Spotify, including streaming rights, I mean, you look at an average Rogan video, it'll get 3 to 4 million YouTube views, which is extraordinary. You go back in the archives with Elon Musk, his Elon Musk interview just on his channel, not even the reposting of it, got 38 million views on YouTube. I mean, these are astronomical numbers, not to mention he's getting 150 million downloads a month on Apple Podcasts. So I would actually think $100 million is lowballing. Now, I guess that's $100 million for the rights of it. He's still going to get ad revenue and royalties, so maybe there's something baked into it. But good for him. I think it was less about the money in the mind of Joe Rogan and more about he actually has internalized a lot of his guests coming on his show that have said that, Joe, you realize that the more you use these platforms, the more you're giving them fodder to be able to censor all of these dissident voices that you're highlighting. And I think Joe Rogan made a very philosophical and moral and courageous stand by saying, you know what? Why don't I go to an external platform that might shake this up a little bit? And good for him, because in his conversation, very informal with, I think it was Barry Weiss that wrote the New York Times opinion, who's one of the very few thoughtful people at the New York Times. She's terrific. I don't agree with her on everything, but she's a very good writer. She had an exclusive interview with him. It was a very long article in the Times where Rogan basically said, look, it's about time they stop censoring us. And I'm looking forward to now this kind of shaking up the status quo. Now, whether or not YouTube realizes this or they just think they're so big and so monolithic they can't be disrupted remains to be seen. But I think we have to take it from a couple different angles. And again, I don't think the monopoly angle is going to work, and they know that. Our monopoly laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act was written, I think, in 1907 for the very specific purpose of breaking up Standard Oil and Andrew Carnegie had a completely different type of monopoly that was trying to vertically monopolize and trying to allegedly exploit consumers. That's not what they're doing. They're instead using the quote-unquote free usage model where you're actually the product. You're not the user, you're the product. They're selling you to the company. They're selling your consumer purchasing. They're selling your search history. You're not the user. You've become the thing that's actually on the assembly line for these tech companies, which is what is so different. And so I think if we're going to create new legislation, I'm careful to take the recommendations of the tech companies. Let me say this. These tech companies come to DC. They hire the best lobbyists on the planet, and they say, oh, regulate us. Bad idea. If a company ever tells you to regulate them, they're writing the regulation that's going to benefit them and prevent a Spotify from ever being a competitive YouTube. So Spotify, they gained $1.3 billion in market value and market cap once they signed Joe Rogan. Awesome. Good for them. That shows that the market realizes the significance. So they got 13 times the market cap value based on just the signing equivalent of what they got from Rogan. So again, that proves the point that Spotify got the better deal in this whole Rogan thing, at least on the monetary side of it. But YouTube is going to come under a lot of fire legislatively if they continue on this path. And so I think the best way to go about this is go to the point of regulation that YouTube disagrees with most, platform access. Maybe there's something to be said that you as a human being get a social security number equivalent to the Social Security Administration, and you're not allowed to be de-affiliated from that platform equivalent to your social security number. Maybe that's a solution. Now, there's a counter argument to be said, but what if they say the most vile, racist, horrible, awful things in society? Well, we allow them to protest outside of the Capitol, right? We allow those awful, horrible people to have a platform outside of the Capitol. And we've actually done a good job of saying more speech is the better solution to that. Now, I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, because there is something to be said that vile, awful, horrible people should be given the capacity to be cross-examined. And sometimes in a social media setting, you can't be cross-examined. But I'm not convinced that that's a good reason to shut up the entire half of Western society. And so, look, there's never any good, perfect answers. We have to admit that. We're just in a very bad answer right now, and a very dangerous one, and a very Stalinist direction right now. If you study the 20th century, it's riddled with once free societies embracing authoritarian tyrants to shut up people they disagree with. And usually that's done through government. The difference right now, it's done through private companies. And what's different about this, and you mentioned this earlier, who's more powerful right now? The 100 people that work at Google right now, or the 100 people at the IRS? Now, some people would traditionally say in the conservative circles, 100 people at the IRS, for sure. Maybe. But do you know what the difference at the IRS is? I can hire an attorney. I can cross-examine them. I could bring them in front of a judge and maybe a jury of my peers and show that the IRS is unfairly targeting me. I can sue them back and I can win. It's hard. It's expensive. I can't do that with Google. In fact, it's proven to be futile. I can't win because they just hide behind the Communications 230 Decency Act, as I mentioned earlier. So I actually think they're more powerful. The IRS can't topple a government. The IRS doesn't even know where I am right now. Google knows exactly where I am. They claim they don't abuse it and look at it. Nonsense, rubbish. That's foolishness. Edward Snowden showed us that people that have the power to abuse it will abuse it. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Edward Snowden for other reasons, but that's a different conversation for a different time. I think there's good and bad that come out of all things. I think Edward Snowden was more of a societal teacher more than anything else, despite I'm not a big believer in leaking private information that is given through NSA. But to close the point, I'll say this. We have to look at where the power is. And we, as people that are skeptical of power, read the Federalist Papers, read Jefferson, read Locke. They hated centralized power. If we hate centralized power, then we shouldn't love a company that's more powerful than our government. Isn't that a logical way to explain it? And just because they're technically an LLC or they're technically a publicly traded company doesn't make them good. And this is a philosophical divergence sometimes in the conservative movement, where all of a sudden we've looked as government automatically bad, private company automatically good. That's generally true. I think that's generally a true rule, but there's exceptions. And I think this is the broad exception, especially when these companies are staffed with the worst elements of American society. Anti-American Marxists that are trained by university professors that want to topple us from within, that have a deconstructionist anti-Western philosophy, that are committed to taking us down at all costs. I'm not willing to do nothing.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about what you see in professors and what you see when you go into these schools. And I want to get into the book as well. Look, I appreciate your thoughts on these platforms, and I do think we're going in the right direction with what Rogan did. Honestly, I feel like, even that move alone might have kept us on YouTube for now, just by knowing that there's a wave here and they need to be careful of public sentiment. So, to be continued on that. Let me get your thoughts on the last 8 to 10 weeks. I know you're in Arizona. You've been locked down. What do you see? What's happened with the coronavirus, the lockdown, everything that you see coming? You famously had a bunch of tweets retweeted by the president a few weeks ago, who obviously was feeling the same way you were feeling. What's Charlie Kirk's read?
I'm more supportive of a president today than I ever have been. I'm more supporter of the president today than I ever have been. Let me be more specific in my language. He's done a phenomenal job here. He's been in a very difficult position. With that being said, I've been very, very critical of these lockdowns. And I think it's important to realize the president was never advocating vocally for lockdowns. He put forth guidelines and he left it to the states. More broadly, though, I think the lockdowns are going to go down as one of the worst decisions in American history. And I think the president agrees with that. The president said that we can't let the cure be worse than the virus. He retweeted me saying that early in March, by the way, early on in this process. I think that we were lied to by a lot of these governors. We were lied to by the Imperial College model. People need to go to jail for what they did. The data and the modeling has proven to be incorrect. And let me just build this out a little bit more. We've never even seen the code that's gone into these modeling that we shut down entire society for. Do you know that the data has still not been made transparent? We've still not seen the input variables that were used, where they said that there could be 2.2 million deaths. 2.2 million deaths. I would have shut down America if those models were put in front of me. My goodness, are you kidding me? 2.2 million deaths. Now, I was more skeptical from the outside because I know that this quote unquote expert community and the hysteria mob in the scientific consensus community that does nothing but tries to create clickbait modeling, they're not actually always rooted in the best interest of our country. They're rooted in what's the best interest of getting them attention and shutting down Western society. I'm afraid that this was a trial run for a police state. I'm afraid that what was happening right now was how far can we push the boundaries? What is America's breaking point? And these people that are now acting surprised, oh, we didn't know it was going to happen. Well, you must have no understanding of 20th century history. I mean, the 20th century is a bloodbath. And the bloodbath started with lockdowns, when people couldn't leave their home and express themselves and be free, when the government told you exactly what to do and how to do it. And that's why I was inherently skeptical from the very beginning. And from an epidemiological perspective, I thought the Grand Princess cruise ship was actually the most instructive piece of data. And I wasn't alone in that. And then I asked the question, well, why don't we just use that as a starting point and see if that's wrong? Instead, we decided to shut down all of Western society and then find out about the virus. That wasn't right. We now have 37 million people out of work in the States. We now have an economy that's going to take a lot of effort to rebuild. Again, the president empowered states, and you saw states like South Dakota and Governor Noem do heroic things and not shutting down her state. And you had Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo be absolute tyrants and continue to be it. And then you have Gretchen Whitmer, who's the worst governor in America. She's a Stalinist or a quasi-Stalinist. And she would have been a great regional governor under the USSR. She would have been terrific. And you know why? Because she's a pure and complete hypocrite. And the example this last weekend should enrage every single person listening to this and watching this, where her husband goes to a marina, and he basically wants his boat to be put into the water. And his husband signed an executive order saying you're not allowed to go into the water because that's going to spread coronavirus. Complete rubbish and total nonsense, absolute balderdash. There's no truth to that. But then he does the whole, no, don't you know who I am? My wife's the governor routine. And the people working at the marina were not thinking like, no, we're not doing this. And they publicized it. At first, she denied it. She said it's not true. She called it an internet hoax. And now she said he was joking around, and I don't think it's funny. She is the absolute perfect archetypical rules for thee, but not for me, autocrat, leftist tyrant. And so we have a decision to make in Western society, which is, are we going to use this as the trial run for Marxist totalitarianism that we never want to go back to? It is a time for an absolute freedom, liberty revolution, the likes of which Western society has never seen. I'm leading it. I went all in early. I was on the front page of the New York Times, 1A, for my outspoken criticism of the lockdowns, being ridiculed and mocked by the sanctimonious leftist mob all throughout the process. But we were right. And now these people that say, oh, what's done is done, we can't hold the people accountable. No. People need to go to jail for this. There are more people that died for suicide in California than of the Chinese coronavirus. And holding China accountable is a completely different conversation, of which I'm happy to comment on. But we need to differentiate between the virus and the lockdown. Because the virus infected people. Politicians shut down your life. Two completely different things.
Were you surprised by the compliance of everyone to that lockdown?
Yes. I was disappointed.
Yeah.
I said this vocally. I said, what? Where's the outrage? We have a couple thousand people protesting. I need a couple million. Since when has America become so easy to comply with state-run autocrats that want to take away your freedoms on shaky science? I was more than surprised, to tell you the truth. I was horrified. Brian, I was let down because this is not a country I thought I was living in. I thought we were a country where they said to stay home. They said, no, you got to prove that to me a lot, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to shut down my business. For me as an evangelical Christian, the most important thing in my life, to tell me I can't go to church on Easter. Excuse me? No. You don't get to do that. My rights are natural from God. I believe in a Lockean theory of natural rights that you have to prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt with good reason every couple days in front of a judge that I can't take the blood and body of Jesus Christ on the holiest day of the Christian calendar. You don't get to do that. We created you. You didn't create me. And so I was I still am really let down and horrified, and I'm afraid that if they try this again with a more aggressive, better planned model, if you will, for no pun intended, that it could be the end of Western society. I hope it's a wake-up call for people, because the tyrants were really close to destroying everything that we loved. And the only reason they didn't is people actually started to protest and wake up. It's not about the modeling. It's not about the science. The only reason this started to change was the 22,000 people that showed up in Lansing and started hawking at Gretchen Whitmer, the tyrant. And she tried calling them Nazis, which was one of the most ridiculous, unfounded accusations in modern political history. You know why? The people there were calling her a Nazi. Now, I wouldn't go that far. I think that you should really reserve that. I'm just going to be perfectly honest with you. But that's not what was happening. It's a lie. They were calling you that. She said, oh, I saw imagery of things I didn't like that were from that time period of the 1930s and 40s. No, they were calling you that, Gretchen Whitmer. They weren't saying that's a good thing. They were saying they hate it so much and they hate you equivalent to that. Again, I'm not saying I completely agree with it. But left is not the left is not in pursuit of truth, and truth is not a left-wing value. And one final thing on this is, look, how many undetected cancers, how many undetected tumors, suicide hotlines, overheating, anxiety medication has gone, applications for anxiety medication has gone through the roof. Opioid use is up, marijuana use is up, alcoholism is up, the price of cocaine is up. As bizarre, I don't know how you quite calculate that without arresting the people that are actually dealing the cocaine, but that's a different conversation for a different time. This is probably going to go down as one of the worst mistakes in Western society. We need to recognize it, admit it, put a flag in the ground, arrest the people that lied to us, and make sure it never happens again.
Yeah, I think I'm always surprised by how much fear is out there. And it's probably because I'm lucky to have conversations on a regular basis here with people who don't buy into a lot of the quote unquote, science that's out there. So I have a front seat to really question what we're being told. But, I live in England, and, these are people that made it through the Battle of Britain in 1940. I mean, they were getting bombed every night right in this neighborhood where I'm at, and they still showed up. And yet I've been shocked to see how scared and frightened they are to come back to work. Now, I don't believe in surveys, but I was talking to Dave Rubin last week, and I was telling him there was a survey that it said 68% of the British public would rather lose their job than go back to work and risk getting the coronavirus. And that blew my mind, that even at this late date, people would still be that scared. But it goes to show you the kind of what's been done to the people with with fear, and fear can make people do things. And like you said, it has historically. So they even said something in Britain the other day. They need another campaign now to get people to go back to work after the first campaign to get people to stay home. And it just makes me wonder how ridiculous it is. At the same point, I can't have a conversation on YouTube or any other social media that even questions masks, social distancing, testing, etc. So look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but all this stuff adds up to a similar result.
Well, and I mean, there's a highly instructive British philosopher, Thomas Hobbes. He was so right. He said, fear is what drives people in their natural condition. He wrote The Leviathan, and it was very, very informative for people. If you want to understand what's happening right now, read The Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. He was right. He said that fear is the default position of human beings, and they will operate in that fear. It's not the pursuit of truth. It's not the pursuit of justice. And he didn't diminish those things, but rather, very, very long form. It's not an easy read. But he comes to the conclusion that in the state of nature, it is fear that drives human beings. And I think he was right. I think that is so true, and that the media has fed into this. And I have to say, the activist media has been one of the most complicit, dangerous, and morally bankrupt institutions in this entire thing. They are solely responsible for a lot of the carnage. And I hope that they realize that people committed suicide because of them. I hope the media realizes that people are dead because of them, not because of the virus. People committed suicide because of the media. How is that possible, you say? We shut down Western society because of the media. Basically, people committed suicide because of that. More people committed suicide in California than of the coronavirus. All death is tragic. But I think it's rather agreed upon that suicide is something that really should bother people. Because unlike a virus that's a voluntary exit from your existence. That's something that is very, very troubling for me. I've lost friends to suicide. I've lost family members. Extended family members, I should say. Be more specific about that. It's not lives versus the economy. It's lives versus lives. Lives versus lives. And the media will get away with it. It's time to create our own and call them out. They are not purveyors of independent truth. The discipline of journalism is dead. These are activists that want to destroy our civilization. It's time to treat them like that.
Yeah. Every time I watch anything now and read anything online or a paper, I see fear-mongering for profits and alternate agendas, and I just see all sorts of nonsense. And yet I'm being censored. Let me move on. What did you think of the Trump's nightly briefings? I started posting like a minute of his opening briefings on my Instagram maybe 6 weeks ago. I've never been very political on this show, but I found them strangely soothing. I also found them to be what I do here at London Real, which is long-form conversations that are unscripted and unedited. And where we had a vacuum of leadership in the world, I just found it admirable that a guy got up every night who doesn't like talking to the media and yet still would talk for 2 hours and try to answer questions and be himself. I don't know. I honestly miss those things, and they got me through some hard times. I don't know. What did you see?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of the modern day equivalent of the Socratic dialogues, where it's like, you can ask me anything for as long as you want, and I'm not going to back down. I loved every minute of it. And the media obviously hated it because he put them on blast and put them on notice. And I thought it was very beneficial. I miss them too. And I just loved the juxtaposition of President Trump and all the other people he'd bring up that had be so scripted. And look, the president was heroic in calling out China's involvement in lying about the virus and its spread throughout the world. The president was heroic in calling out the media and their dishonest coverage throughout the entire process. And so I'm always of the believer, the more Trump, the better. There's people that want to put him in the box, and I say, no, you have a guy that has 40 years of institutional experience and instinct of how to brand, and actually more than 40 years, probably 50 years of institutional instinct and experience of how to brand and how to message, how to communicate with people. And you have been wrong about everything over the last couple decades. Why don't you just let the guy that actually got elected to president by defeating the Bush dynasty, the Clinton dynasty, the media dynasty, the tech companies? Maybe he knows what he's doing. And so I'm always of the opinion that from a default position, not that every decision he's going to make is obviously going to be perfect. That would be against human nature, but his trend line is going to be in the direction of victory and in the direction of what is right and what is good. The Trump trajectory, if you will always end in a position that is good for our country. That is because he's so self-aware of the decisions that he's making, and then he has an ability to pivot and correct better than any other person I've ever seen in public life. He says, oh, this is working? No. Okay, well, this might be working. Okay. And whereas other politicians are so dogmatic, and they have no ability to be able to self-assess, look at how things are going, and then actually have an end goal in mind of what is best for our country.
Yeah, when I was watching, I kept thinking, what would a career politician be telling me right now? It would just be some scripted nonsense, and I'd be like, gosh, I'm just glad I'm not listening to somebody who's been in D.C. for 30 years. Also, it's funny to watch him because his gut says, get America back to work. And like on his right shoulder and left shoulder, he's getting this study and this. But he's thinking, no, we got to get America back to work. We got to get people, it's just weird to see him grappling with that and ultimately trusting his gut. That's what I see him doing now. And that's been fascinating for me to watch. What's it like? Is it surreal when you tweet out like China virus and then the president is kind of using that term days later? Is that surreal?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just a kid from Chicago that didn't go to college, that started an organization on campuses, and now I have the leader of the free world using the two words that I thought would better describe the virus than some silly COVID-19.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below.